3 chains can sit side by side in the same jewelry box and look almost identical. One of them may be plated costume jewelry worth about what a cup of coffee costs. One may hold a few $100s in gold, and one may quietly be worth several thousand in metal and in antique value together. They look the same because we all judge jewelry the same way. We glance at it. And a glance is the one thing that cannot tell you the difference. So before you donate anything, and above all, before anybody melts anything, let me walk you through 10 chains that get put in the costume pile by mistake. Number 1 has been sitting in American drawers since before the First World War, and almost nobody recognizes it. 2 words first, because they make everything else work. The mark is smaller than a grain of rice, and it lives on the clasp or the little tag beside it. Your phone camera, zoomed all the way in under a lamp, is a perfectly good magnifier. Then the weight, on any kitchen scale that reads to 1/10 of a gram. Mark, then weigh. Everything else today is detail. Number 10, the tangle. You know exactly what this looks like. 5 or 6 thin chains at the bottom of the box, fused into one grey lump nobody has touched in 15 years. Here is why it gets lost. It stops reading as jewelry and starts reading as clutter. And clutter goes in the donation bag without anybody ever opening it up. 2 things to check. First, untangle it, which takes about 10 minutes with a white towel, a drop of baby oil and 2 straight pins. Second, and this is the part people skip, check every clasp separately. A knot like that is almost always a mixture. Different decades, different people, different metals. A realistic number, and this is where I owe you the arithmetic. It starts with 4 marks, not 15. 4, 925 is silver. 585 is 14 karat gold. 750 is 18 karat. 916 is 22 karat. If you remember nothing else today, remember those 4, and we will meet a few unusual ones later. As I am recording this, in August of 2026, gold is trading somewhere near $4,500 a troy ounce, which works out to roughly $144 for a gram of pure gold. That price changes every single day, so treat every figure I give you today as an example, not a quotation. And one distinction I will come back to all the way through, because it is what people get wrong most expensively. Melt value is the metal arithmetic. What a buyer offers you is usually less than that. What an antique piece is worth to a collector can be considerably more. 3 different numbers, and they are not interchangeable. So, back to the knot. A thin 14 karat cable chain of 18 inches usually weighs 2 to 4 grams. If 5 come out of that tangle and 3 are solid gold, you are looking at perhaps 9 or 10 grams, which is roughly $800 in metal at that example price. The biggest mistake here is assuming a broken chain is a cheap chain. Thin gold chains break. That is what they do. A snapped chain has exactly the same metal value as an unbroken one. And the next one gets dismissed for the opposite reason. It is not broken at all. It just does not look like a necklace. Number 9. The one everybody decided was a watch band. Look at it for a second before I tell you. If this was in your mother's box, would it go in the good pile or the costume pile? A wide, flat, softly rippling band of gold that behaves like fabric. No visible links at all, just a fine woven texture. The Italians call this Milanese mesh, and it has been made in Milan and Vicenza for well over a century. It gets misfiled because it does not look like a necklace. It looks like a strap. So the family logic runs. The watch is long gone. This is the leftover band. It is probably steel. But mesh is one of the most gold-intensive things a chainmaker can produce. Every one of those woven elements is drawn wire. There is a great deal of metal in something that reads as light, because it is spread so thin and so wide. 2 things to check. Fold a corner gently over your finger. Woven gold drapes like liquid and springs back flat with no memory of the fold, where steel and plated mesh feel stiffer and hold a crease. Then look at the end caps, where the mesh gathers into the clasp. That is where the mark hides on this style, and it is why so many people conclude there is no mark at all. A realistic number. A substantial 18 karat Milanese collar around 30 grams holds roughly $3,200 in metal at our example price. A light modern one might be 8 grams, which is a very different conversation, so weigh it before you imagine either number. The biggest mistake is throwing it in with the watch parts. Once it is in that drawer, it never comes out again. Now, the next one is the chain almost every woman watching this has owned, and it has a crease in it. Number 8, the 1980s herringbone. I know exactly which one you are picturing. Flat, liquid, mirror bright, lying against the skin like poured metal. And almost every one of them has the same ending. It caught on a coat zipper or a seatbelt, it folded, the fold never came out, and it went back in the box that same afternoon. Now I am going to disagree with something you may have heard, and I want to be careful about it, because the popular version sounds satisfying. You will hear that softer, purer gold kinks more easily, so a kink is a purity certificate. That is not right. Herringbones crease because of geometry, not purity. The links are flat and angled and locked into one continuous plane, which is exactly why the chain lies so beautifully flat and exactly why it cannot twist. Bend it out of that plane and it deforms. 10-carat herringbones crease, gold-filled ones crease, sterling silver ones crease. The crease tells you the chain is a herringbone. It tells you nothing about the carat. And the honest version is better news than the myth. The crease has no effect at all on the metal value. 2 things to check. Look for the small flat tag near the clasp, which on these usually reads $5.85 or $7.50, often with the word Italy. Then weigh it, because a 20-gram 14-carat herringbone folded in half still contains 20 grams of 14-carat gold, which is close to $1,700 in metal at our example price. Here is where the 3 numbers matter. That crease does reduce what the chain is worth as a wearable piece, because a badly kinked herringbone is difficult and often uneconomical to repair. So one number stays the same and the other drops. Know which one you are being offered. The biggest mistake is apologizing for the damage and accepting a lower offer on the metal because of it. The metal does not care. And if a creased chain surprised you, the next one fools people for a completely different reason. It is not damaged at all. It is the wrong color. Number 7. The chain the whole house agreed was silver. Take a second. Which pile? White gold leaves the factory with a very thin layer of rhodium on it, which is what gives it that bright, cold, almost blue-white flash. Rhodium is a surface finish and it wears with use. Underneath is a faintly warm, slightly grey metal that to an untrained eye looks very much like tarnished silver. And here is the thing people find genuinely surprising. A white gold chain stamped $5.85 contains exactly as much gold as a yellow chain stamped $5.85. Identical. The whiteness comes from what the other 41.5% is made of, usually palladium or nickel. It is a decision about colour, not about gold content. 2 things to check. The mark first. 925, sterling, or the letters STER mean silver. 5.85 or 7.50 mean gold, no matter what your eyes are telling you. Then pick up a piece of sterling in one hand and the mystery chain in the other. Gold is close to twice as dense as silver, and once you have felt that difference, you tend not to forget it. A realistic number. A mid-weight white gold collar of 25 grams holds near $2,100 in metal at our example price. A delicate one of 6 grams holds about $500. Same color, very different chain. The biggest mistake is polishing it hard before anyone has looked at it. Leave the surface alone. Quick check before we go on. If you have learned only 3 things so far, make them these. And if this is useful to you, subscribing does genuinely help this channel keep making it. Now back to the list, because the next one is the chain people are most certain about and most often wrong about. Number 6. The rope chain that looks like every fake in America. Have a guess before I answer that. The rope chain is that twisted, spiraling, light-catching style that was in every mall jewelry counter in this country for 30 years. And because it is also the most commonly plated and copied style ever made, a great many people look at a real one and assume it came from a kiosk. The answer is construction. Both chains can be stamped 14 carat, honestly and legally. But one is solid and one is hollow. A 20-inch, 3mm solid 14 carat rope commonly weighs around 14 or 15 grams. A hollow one of exactly the same length and width can weigh around 5. That is roughly $1,200 in metal against roughly $400 at our example price. For 2 chains, a photograph cannot tell apart. And a heavier vintage rope, 4 or 5 millimeters, can run past 30 grams, which is well into the thousands. 2 things to check. Weigh it, because the scale is the only thing that answers this question. Then look at the ends where the chain meets the clasp, and at any spot where the chain has been damaged, because a hollow rope crushes and dents where a solid one resists. The biggest mistake here is the one I most want you to take away from this whole video. A stamp tells you the purity of the metal. It does not tell you how much of it is there. Now, before number 5, a quick word about a chain that is not on this list and that people throw away constantly. If you find a chain stamped with the letters GF or 1/20th 12-karat gold filled, or the older phrase rolled gold plate, that is not solid gold, and I am not going to pretend it is. But it is not plating either. Gold filled is a sheet of real carat gold mechanically bonded to a brass core, and under Federal Trade Commission rules, an item marked gold filled must carry a gold layer of at least 1/20th of the total weight. The layer is far thicker than electroplate, so the metal in a 40-gram gold filled chain works out to about 1 gram of pure gold. That is not a windfall. But the American firms that made this material, Simmons of Attleboro, Massachusetts among them, made it beautifully, and a good Edwardian gold-filled chain very often sells for more as a wearable antique than the metal inside it is worth. Do not scrap it. Sell it as what it is. Number 5. The chain everybody calls the copper one. A rich, deep pink chain, sometimes almost salmon-coloured. And in an American jewellery box, pink metal reads as copper, which reads as costume, which means the bottom of the pile. Rose gold is simply gold alloyed with a higher proportion of copper. More copper, more pink. That is the whole recipe, and it has been made that way for 200 years. 2 things to check, and the second one is where this gets interesting. First, the mark, which may not say anything you recognise. Second, if the number is unfamiliar, stop before you discard it. If a rose gold chain is marked 583, that is Soviet-era gold. 583 parts per thousand, which is very close to our 14-karat. And if instead of a number you find the figure 56, that is the older Russian zlotnik system, which was replaced in 1927. So a chain marked 56 was made before that date. Often you will find it beside a small profile of a woman's head in a traditional headdress, which collectors call the kokoshnik mark. That single stamp is doing 2 jobs. It tells you the metal, and it tells you the piece is roughly a century old. A realistic number. 20 grams at that purity is somewhere near $1,680 in metal at our example price, and an unusual old mark can add to that. But that addition is a matter for an appraiser, not for me, and not for a scale. The biggest mistake is selling an unusual foreign mark into a scrap lot, where the age is worth nothing at all, and the next chain has no mark of any kind, which almost everybody reads as a verdict. It is not. Number 4, the chain with nothing stamped on it anywhere. The belief runs like this. Real gold is stamped, so no stamp means not gold. And out it goes. Here is what the law actually says, and it surprises people. The National Gold and Silver Stamping Act was passed in 1906, and it did not require anyone to mark anything. What it required was that if you choose to make a quality claim, the claim has to be accurate within a defined tolerance. A later amendment in 1961 added that a quality mark must be accompanied by the trademark of the firm standing behind it, but an unmarked piece of gold was, and largely still is, perfectly lawful to make and to sell. So a great deal of genuinely solid gold jewellery carries no carat mark at all. That is not an exception. It is a whole category. There is a second reason, and it is very common. Chains get repaired and shortened, and clasps get replaced when the spring wears out. The mark lives on the clasp. Replace the clasp, and the evidence is gone. 2 things to check. Look at every component separately, especially the clip, because antique dealers see one pattern constantly, where the chain itself carries nothing but the little clip on the end is stamped 9C, and then, rather than guessing, have it tested. This is the one category where a small professional testing fee genuinely earns its money. Ask for an X-ray fluorescence test, which is standard equipment at reputable buyers and does not damage the piece. The biggest mistake is the donation bag. An unmarked chain is a question, not an answer. Before the final 3, here is the mistake I most want you to avoid in this entire video. Melting is the one decision on this list that cannot be undone. Everything else, you can revisit. A chain sold as scrap for a few $100s when it was an antique worth several times that is gone permanently. So slow down at that specific moment, and only at that moment. Number 3. The chain the family agreed looks brassy. Look at both. Most people pick the pale one because it looks more like what we expect gold to look like. Somebody in the family travelled. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Or it arrived as a wedding gift from a side of the family that does things differently. And it has been in a box ever since, because that colour never matched anything. American eyes are calibrated to 10 and 14 karat gold because that is what our department stores sold for a century. Both are pale and restrained because more than half of what you are looking at is not gold at all. It is alloy. 22 karat is a different experience entirely. Deep, saturated, warm, almost orange, and noticeably softer. To an eye trained on pale American gold, that saturation reads as loud, as cheap, as brass. It is the exact opposite. The color is that deep because there is almost nothing in it except gold. Two things to check. The mark, which will usually be 916 for 22 karat or 875 for 21 karat. And the weight, because these were very often made heavy on purpose. Here is the number worth holding on to. 30 grams of 22 karat gold is somewhere near $3,950 in metal at our example price. That same 30 grams in 10 karat is around $1,800. Same size, same weight on the scale, the same object to a stranger across a table, and more than double the money. And there is a reason so many exist. In much of South Asia and the Gulf, gold jewelry is not primarily decorative. It is savings, held in a form a woman controls herself, bought by weight and made heavy on purpose. The chain in your box was somebody's security. The biggest mistake is letting the color decide. Color is the least reliable signal on this entire list. The next one has the opposite problem. It is the right color, and it still gets dismissed because it looks too new. Number 2, the wide flat collar from the 80s and 90s. Your instinct, before I say anything? A smooth, seamless, slightly domed band that curves around the neck in one continuous piece. No visible links from the front, often a soft brushed finish, frequently with a small pendant sitting in the center. In the trade, you will hear it called an omega collar. It gets dismissed because it looks manufactured. There is no old-world detail, nothing that says antique. It looks like something that came in a gift box from a catalogue, and that is exactly what many people picture when they picture costume jewelry. The construction is the opposite of what people assume. An omega collar is built from many individual gold plates mounted on a flexible internal backbone. It is complicated manufacturing, and the ones sold through American department stores were very often solid 14 karat, and they are heavy. A substantial one runs 35 to 50 grams without difficulty, and 40 grams of 14 karat is around $3,370 in metal at our example price. Two things to check. Weigh it, because some omega collars are hollow, which is still real gold but a good deal less of it. And look for 925 anywhere on the piece. Vermeil is sterling silver with a gold layer over it. It is a real material with real value, but that value is the silver, and it is a small fraction of solid. Check the tongue of the clasp and the inside of the tube it slides into, because that is where the mark tends to sit on this style. The biggest mistake is assuming that heavy means solid, or that solid means heavy, without ever putting it on the scale. And now, number 1. The chain I have watched get undervalued more than anything else on this list, and the one your family has probably always described as those flapper beads without the beads. Picture a gold chain 50 inches long, sometimes 60, far too long to be a normal necklace. Slim links, often quite plain, and on one end, a peculiar little swiveling hook. The trade calls this a guard chain, a long guard, or a muff chain, and the reason it exists tells you almost everything about the woman who first owned it. Women's clothing of the 1800s had no useful pockets, so a long chain draped over the shoulder carried what she needed through her day: her watch, her folding eyeglasses, her keys. And in winter, it ran through her fur muff, so the muff could not be set down and lost. That is what the clip is for. It ends up in the junk pile for 3 reasons, and every one is a misreading. It is too long, so people assume it is a costume rope from the 20s. It is plain, so people assume it is not fine jewelry. And it very often carries no mark on the chain itself, only on that clip, which is exactly the trap from number 4. These chains are heavy, not because any one link is heavy, but because there are so many of them. 55 grams is quite ordinary for a good one. 55 grams of 9-karat gold is right around $3,000 in metal at our example price, before anyone has considered that it is over 100 years old. 2 things to check. The clip, always, because that is where the mark hides, and then look for one particular number. 15 karat was a legal British standard, and it existed only between 1854 and 1932, when it was replaced by 14 karat. There is no such thing as a modern 15-carat chain, so that mark is telling you two things at once. It is telling you the metal is 62.5% gold, which is higher than 14-carat, and it is telling you roughly when the chain was made. One more thing to look at, because it only shows up when somebody really cared. On the better Victorian guard chains, each link has a small inner link sitting inside it, positioned so the links wear against that sacrificial piece instead of against each other. That was fussy, expensive work. If you find it, you are holding something a serious maker built to outlive its owner. And this is where melt value and real value part company most dramatically. The metal number is one thing. What an antique dealer or a collector would pay for a complete, original, well-made Victorian guard chain can be considerably more. I am not going to quote you a figure, because condition and originality drive it, and I cannot see your chain. That is precisely the conversation to have with an appraiser. The biggest mistake is the one that ends this whole story, selling it by the gram. Now let me give you a way to remember all of this, because 10 chains is a lot and 4 words is not. Look. Handle the piece in good light and notice the style, the clasp, the wear. Mark. Find every stamp on every component and photograph it. Not just the clasp. Weigh. Grams, on a kitchen scale, written down. Verify. Take it to somebody with proper equipment before you act on any of it. And I want to be honest about that last word. Everything I have given you today is a screening tool, not an authentication. Your phone camera, your kitchen scale, a magnet, even the water displacement test some people like will all narrow things down. None of them proves anything. Kitchen scales have real limits, hollow chains and mixed components throw the numbers off, and a stamp by itself is only a claim somebody made about their own goods. Screening tells you what deserves a professional look. That is its whole job, and it is a valuable job. Please do not attempt acid or scratch testing at home. Those methods damage the piece, and the chemicals are hazardous without ventilation and eye protection. And when you do know what you have, there are 4 sensible outcomes, not one. Keep it, if it means something to you. That is a legitimate answer, and it needs no justification. Have it appraised, if it is antique, if it carries a designer name, or if it has an unusual mark like the ones we talked about. Insure it, if replacing it would genuinely hurt. Many household policies limit jewelry cover unless a piece is scheduled separately, so ask your own insurer. Or sell it, once you know both the melt value and whether it has value beyond the metal. That is your decision, and it is not mine to make for you. I am not a certified appraiser, and nothing in this video is an appraisal or financial advice. Please consult a credentialed appraiser and check your own state and local regulations before you buy, sell, or insure anything valuable. One short story before I let you go. In the late 1980s, a woman in West London bought a box of jewellery at a car boot sale for £10. Inside was a large clear stone in a dull mounting that did not sparkle, so she wore it as an everyday ring for about 30 years, certain it was costume. The Gemological Institute of America eventually certified it as a 26-carat antique cushion-shaped diamond, and in June of 2017 it sold at Sotheby's in London for a reported £656,000. It failed the 2-second glance for 30 years, and a single professional opinion changed everything. That is the whole lesson of this video. And it is not a gold chain story. It is a looking story. So here is what I would like you to actually do tonight or this weekend. Not all 10 chains. 1. A white towel on the kitchen table. 1 chain. Photograph the clasp and the end tag with your phone. Write down every mark exactly as you see it, even if it means nothing to you, even if it is a single letter. Put it on the scale and write down the grams. And then stop. Do not polish it. Do not repair it. Do not test it with chemicals. Do not scrap it, and do not sell it. Just know what it is first. Then tell me in the comments what you found. The mark, roughly what it weighs, and what style of chain you think it is. I read these, and there are people in this comment section who know a great deal. I will say one honest thing about that. A comment section is a good place to learn what you might have. It is not a substitute for having someone qualified put the piece in their hands. Use us to get curious. Use an appraiser to get certain. And whatever else you do this week, do not let a single chain leave that house until you have read the clasp. Thank you for spending this time with me. I will see you in the next one.